We're in the middle of a vast ecological emergency.
We're looking at starvation.
I mean, think about that. Wildfires in the Arctic.
It's not going to be too long until it comes for everybody.
You can't sort this one out by being the world's best recycler or taking shorter showers.
I'm afraid the sort of traditional methods of campaigning that we've been using haven't kind of delivered that sense of urgency yet.
So what Extinction Rebellion is doing is creating disruption in society so that people start attending to the issue.
It is a peaceful, non-violent movement for civil disobedience.
The best thing I could do was to be out there demanding radical change.
Extinction Rebellion's entire focus is about reweaving the 100%, the whole human family.
This is not even about future generations anymore. This is about us and whether we get to have a future. We need everyone's hands on deck and bodies on the line in order to stop these catastrophic possibilities from coming to fruition.
Climate change is happening faster than even scientists had thought possible. Scorching heat waves, ferocious storms, torrential downpours.
This is the issue of our time.
There will be climate refugees, even here in Britain.
Nothing like this has ever happened before. We're evidently chapter 1.
Today, Mr. Speaker, this House must declare an environment and climate emergency. We have no time to waste. We are living in a climate crisis that will spiral dangerously out of control unless we take rapid and dramatic action now. This is no longer about a distant future. We're talking about nothing less than the irreversible destruction of the environment within our lifetimes of members of this House. Young people know this. They have the most to lose. I was, like many members of this House on all sides, deeply moved a few weeks ago to see the streets outside this Parliament filled with colour and noise by children chanting, "Our planet, our future." For someone of my generation, it was inspiring, but also humbling that children felt they had to leave school to teach us, adults, a lesson. The truth is, they are ahead of the politicians on this, the most important issue of our time. We are witnessing an unprecedented upsurge of climate activism, with groups like Extinction Rebellion forcing the politicians in this building to listen. For all the dismissive and defensive column inches the protesters have provoked, they are a massive and, I believe, very necessary wake-up call. Today, we have the opportunity to say, we hear you.
Today I'm appealing for leadership from politicians, from business and scientists, and from the public everywhere. We have the tools to make our actions effective. What we still lack, even after the Paris Agreement, is the leadership and the ambition to do what is needed. And what makes all of this even more disturbing is that we were warned. Scientists have been telling us for decades, over and over again. And far too many leaders have refused to listen. And far too few have acted with the vision the science demands. And we see the results. In some situations, they are approaching scientists' worst-case scenarios. The world's richest nations are the most responsible for the climate crisis, yet the effects are being felt first and worst by the poorest nations and the most vulnerable peoples and communities.
Well, we start with the heat wave that continues to batter India. Extreme temperatures across the north and the east of the country have caused hundreds of deaths. In the south, the searing hot spell has led to severe water shortages. The situation has reached a crisis point in Chennai. This is India's sixth biggest city.
There was a freak hailstorm in Mexico. It dropped about 5 feet of ice pellets yesterday north of Mexico City. Look at these images.
This. 5 feet.
5 feet. Cars were absolutely buried. Nearly 200 homes and businesses reported damage from the hail. There were no casualties.
That's amazing. And the whole thing is amazing.
It really is.
42 million Americans are in the path of severe storms tonight. And this evening, the National Weather Service says this one in Indiana was a tornado with wind speeds of up to 125 miles an hour, an EF2.
You can see that this building's roof completely ripped off.
The Growing Kids Learning Center in South Bend took a big hit. Fortunately, no children were inside.
Right now, though, we want to go from earthquakes to extreme heat as temperatures are expected to climb into the 80s in Alaska today. That's actually a slight dip from the record-breaking 90 degrees that made lakes and ponds a go-to destination and broke records in Anchorage and 2 other cities on the 4th of July.
Millions of people here in Europe have been sweltering in this summer's second extreme heat wave, and across the continent, records are being broken. A wall of hot Saharan air trapped over northwestern Europe is the cause of these record highs. Let's take a closer look now. Germany is at 42.6 degrees Celsius. The temperature's continuing to rise. The Netherlands, 40.4. Belgium, 40.6. And if you look at France, they're at 42.6 degrees. Now that represents a shattering of the old record by more than 2 degrees. In a moment, we'll be talking to a climate scientist who says this could be the new normal.
Tonight in the Bahamas, a life-threatening storm surge sweeping across the island nation.
This is very deep water.
The storm came ashore on the Ecological Islands on Sunday. With Category 5 hurricane force winds gusting above 225 miles per hour. Cars and entire homes submerged.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning. Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops? And if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine.
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes. All of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so much.
Craig Funky is flying me to the edge of a violent thunderstorm.
You see how nice and crisp the top of that cloud is up there?
Yeah. But the former commercial pilot isn't some adrenaline junkie courting danger. He's a cloud seeder, chasing this menacing storm to squeeze out extra rain for the drought-stricken farmland below.
As a pilot going through school, you're taught to avoid thunderstorm.
This is Craig's job, firing chemicals into the clouds in a controversial attempt to modify the weather. He's literally a rainmaker.
That dark, thick cloud over there has lots of moisture in it.
That's part of the cloud that was seeded. It actually looks heavy with rain.
Cloud seeding has been used around the world for decades.
It looks like he's painting the sky.
The flares are shooting millions of silver iodide and calcium chloride particles into the cloud, where they collide with drops of water and ice and produce even more moisture. Then, usually within 20 minutes...
So what is this white smoky stuff over here?
That's rain.
Oh, that's rain?
Yeah, that's rain. All this is rain out here.
Don't worry if you can't hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. This is the loudest sound you could possibly conceive. And, as it turns out, the cleanest.
Now, the most amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you! It's raining! That's unbelievable! Oh. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
Now let's look at what the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy has to say about these things. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place, in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. The Lord is teaching men that there are limits to his forbearance, in fires, in floods, in earthquakes, in the fury of the great deep, in calamities by sea and by land. The warning is given that God's Spirit will not always strive with men. The enemy has worked, and he is working still. He is come down in great power, and the Spirit of God is being withdrawn from the earth. And these very things will increase until the close of this earth's history. The religious world too is to be terribly shaken, for the end of all things is at hand. Before the Son of Man appears in the clouds of heaven, everything in nature will be convulsed. Satan works through the elements also to garner his harvest of unprepared souls. He has studied the secrets of the laboratories of nature, and he uses all his power to control the elements as far as God allows. Even now he is at work, in accidents, in calamities by sea and by land, in great conflagrations, in fierce tornadoes and in terrific hailstorms, in tempests, floods, cyclones, tidal waves and earthquakes. In every place and in 1,000 forms is Satan exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. Destruction will be upon the inhabitants of the world. The beasts of the field will groan, and the earth will languish. And then the great deceiver will persuade men that those who serve God are causing these evils. It will be declared that the nation is offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced, and that those who present the claims of the fourth commandment, thus destroying reverence for Sunday, are the troublers of the nation, preventing its restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity. Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they think, as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are a result of Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. They think that by exalting this false rest day higher and still higher, compelling obedience to the Sunday law, the spurious Sabbath, they are doing God's service. Those who honor the Bible Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order, as breaking down the moral restraints of society, causing anarchy and corruption, and calling down the judgments of God upon the earth. From what we have just read, is there anything that we, as humans, can do to stop these things? The answer is no. God has told us beforehand that these things were going to happen. Can we now go on and live the way we want and not care about the environment? No. But our focus must shift from the worldly view of all these things to what God tells us. We have to know that the dragon, or Satan, is behind everything, and that he is causing his agents, namely the beast Antichrist system with its leader the Pope, the image of the beast America, and apostate Protestant churches, to carry out his plans. We must persevere and focus on Jesus. We must not panic blindly and uninformed along with the world. So now let's have a look at what the Pope has to say about all these climate calamities.
Do un cordiale benvenuto alla delegazione del Movimento Cattolico Mondiale per il Clima. E li ringrazio per l'impegno a curare la nostra casa comune in questi tempi di grave crisi socio-ambientale. Vi incoraggio a continuare a tessere le reti affinché le chiese locali rispondano con determinazione al grido della terra e al grido dei poveri.
Pope Francis has just released his new encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si. First, the big contribution of Laudato Si is an overview of the environmental crisis from a religious point of view. Until now, the dialogue about the environment was framed mainly with political, scientific, and economic language. Now, the language of faith decisively enters the discussion. Fourth, against those who argue that a papal encyclical on the environment has no real authority, Pope Francis explicitly states that Laudato Si is now added to the body of the Church's social teaching. It continues reflection on modern-day problems that began with Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum on capital and labor in 1891. Fifth, discussions about ecology can be grounded in the Bible and church tradition. In Chapter 2, Pope Francis introduces the Gospel of Creation, in which he leads readers through the call to care for creation that extends as far back as the book of Genesis, when humankind was called to till and keep the earth. And finally, this encyclical is addressed to everyone on the planet and calls for a new way of looking at things. We face an urgent crisis when the earth has begun more and more to look like, in Pope Francis's vivid language, an immense pile of filth. Still, the document is hopeful, reminding us that because God is with us, all of us can strive to change course. We can move towards an ecological conversion in which we can listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. To use religious language, what the Pope is calling for is conversion.
This responsibility for God's earth means that human beings endowed with intelligence must respect the laws of nature. Along these same lines, rest on the seventh day is meant not only for human beings but also so that your ox and your donkey may have rest. All it takes is one good person to restore hope. The biblical tradition clearly shows that this renewal entails recovering and respecting the rhythms inscribed in nature by the hand of the Creator. We see this, for example, in the law of the Sabbath. On the seventh day, God rested from His work. He commanded Israel to set aside each seventh day as a day of rest, a Sabbath. On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the world. The law of the weekly rest forbade work on the seventh day, so that your ox and your donkey may have rest. And so the day of rest, centered on the Eucharist, sheds its light on the whole week and motivates us to greater concern for nature and the poor. Clearly in this encyclical, the Pope refers to the Sunday as the day of rest, and that we have to keep Sunday to fight climate change. The dignitaries of church and state will unite to bribe, persuade and compel all classes to honor the Sunday. Political corruption is destroying love of and regard for truth, and in order to secure public favor, legislators will yield to the popular demand for a law enforcing Sunday observance. In the soon coming conflict, we shall see exemplified the prophet's words, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of his seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." Revelation 12:17. Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they think, as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are a result of Sunday breaking. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, these influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. They think that by exalting the false rest day higher and still higher, compelling obedience to the Sunday law, the spurious Sabbath, they are doing God's service. Those who honor the Bible Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order, as breaking down the moral restraints of society, causing anarchy and corruption, and calling down the judgments of God upon the earth. Let us quickly sum up. According to the world, all the calamities that's hitting the earth, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, everything is being caused by climate change. The Pope, in his encyclical Laudato Si', urges the world to keep Sunday as a day of rest to combat these climate change calamities. According to the Bible and spirit of prophecy, God has told us that these things are going to happen. And as we have read, God has told us that the people keeping the true Sabbath and the commandments of God will be accused that these calamities are as a result of them breaking the false Sunday Sabbath. Now let's take a look at what's happening around the world with this climate saga. "And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them, and the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths."
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am a climate activist from Sweden, and for the last 9 months I have been school striking for the climate every Friday in front of the Swedish Parliament. We need to change the way we speak about the climate crisis, and we need to call it what it is, an emergency. We are Homo sapiens sapiens, of the family Hominidae, of the order Primates, of the class Mammalia, of the kingdom Animalia. We are a part of nature. We are social animals. We are naturally drawn to our leaders. During the last months, millions of children have been school striking for the climate, gaining lots of attention for the climate crisis. But we children are not leaders, nor are the scientists, unfortunately. This is above all an emergency, and not just any emergency. This is the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced. This is not something you can like on Facebook. For too long, the people in power have gotten away with basically not doing anything to stop the climate and ecological breakdown. They have gotten away with stealing our future and selling it for profit. But we young people are waking up, and we promise we will not let you get away with it anymore. Thank you.
We are the younger generation. We are the ones who are going to be affected, and therefore we demand justice.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now!
Everyone should mobilize for the 20th and the 20th of September, because this is a global issue which actually affects everyone. We are all in the same boat, so everyone should be concerned about this. This shouldn't be the children's responsibility, because now the adults also need to help us. So we are calling for them to strike from their work, because we need everyone. There is nothing we can't do, and I mean, if not you should do it, then who else? And if not we should do it now, then when should we do it?
The preparation had been tough, but Greta Thunberg is now undertaking the journey of a lifetime. At the southern English port of Plymouth, the racing yacht, the Malizia 2, a professional crew and her father, awaiting them all the challenges of the Atlantic Ocean for at least the next 2 weeks. Despite all the technology designed to make this a carbon-neutral journey, there is little luxury and even less privacy. This teenager, who has become a beacon for so many young climate crisis activists, now prepared to brave the challenges of the open ocean, in the hope that her message will be heard and understood. Greta Thunberg's trip across the Atlantic is expected to take 2 weeks. She aims to be in New York for the next month's UN Climate Action Summit. But the crossing won't be easy. August is peak hurricane season. After New York, Thunberg says she'll travel by train and bus to Canada and Mexico. She also plans to attend the annual UN Climate Conference in Santiago, Chile in December. And Thunberg is doing this despite the criticism and vitriol she has experienced from climate change deniers.
I'm not concerned about reactions. What I'm concerned about is whether we will do something or not, whether the people in power will react and act with necessary force.
It's taken the determination of one 16-year-old schoolgirl to spark off a global movement where Greta Thunberg has been urging politicians to do something more than say the right words, but to put it into action as well.
At this point, you've got no idea why we're striking. Then, like, what on earth? You must be utter idiots if you're wondering why we're striking. Like, look around you. Like, look at the climate change. Look at the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere.
We are in Genova, Italy, protesting against climate change because politicians today are not willing to do enough about it. So we're taking to the streets to fight for our futures and for those who are suffering from the consequences of climate change today.
Wir haben die Kohle satt, unsere Zukunft, unsere Stadt. Wir haben die Kohle satt, unsere Zukunft, unsere Stadt.
Today, we spend the hour with Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old Swedish climate activist who's inspired millions across the globe. Last year, as a 15-year-old, she launched a school strike for the climate, started by going in front of the Swedish parliament every day for 3 weeks, then skipped school every Friday to stand in front of the parliament demanding action to prevent catastrophic climate change. Her protest spread, quickly going global. Hundreds of thousands of school kids around the globe have participated in their own local school strikes for the climate. Since her strike began in 2018, Greta has become a leading figure in the climate justice movement. She's joined protests across Europe. She's addressed world leaders at the UN climate talks in Poland and the European Union Parliament. She has even met the Pope. And now she's in New York to join a global climate strike on September 20th and address the UN Climate Action Summit at the UN on September 23rd. Greta has refused to fly for years because of emissions, so she arrived here after a 2-week transatlantic voyage aboard a zero-emissions racing yacht. She's also planning to attend the UN Climate Summit in Santiago, Chile in December. So I want to go to the speech you gave when we saw you in Poland, in Katowice, at the UN Climate Summit. This is a clip of what you had to say to the UN Secretary General and all those who were gathered for the UN Climate Summit, for the COP.
Today we use 100 million barrels of oil every single day. There are no politics to change that. There are no rules to keep that oil in the ground. So we can no longer save the world by playing by the rules, because the rules have to be changed. So we have not come here to beg the world leaders to care for our future. They have ignored us in the past and they will ignore us again. We have come here to let them know that change is coming, whether they like it or not. The people will rise to the challenge. And since our leaders are behaving like children, we will have to take the responsibility they should have taken long ago. Thank you.
Let's talk about visiting the Pope, what that meant to you and what the Pope has said about the climate crisis and what you said to him.
Yes, I mean, he has been pretty outspoken about this. So I think that is good that he's talking about this, and he was very supportive, and he said that I should continue doing this, and so yeah, it was incredible to meet him, of course, and I was very honored to have the chance to do that and to speak to him.
So Greta Thunberg, I want to talk about the movements all over the world that you are very much a part of and are inspiring. When you went to Britain, you spoke in the British Parliament, but you also spoke at an Extinction Rebellion protest, and we want to play a clip.
We are now facing an existential crisis, the climate crisis and ecological crisis. which have never been treated as crisis before. They have been ignored for decades. And for way too long, the politicians and the people in power have gotten away with not doing anything at all to fight the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. But we will make sure that they will not get away with it any longer.
Greta, there you are addressing a group at the Extinction Rebellion. That group was just really formulating when we were in Poland. They were there in Britain starting to superglue themselves to places like ExxonMobil headquarters and other places. Can you talk about the significance of this movement?
Yes, I mean, the Extinction Rebellion had really had a massive impact, I think, on our debate, especially in Europe, maybe not as much here, but that they are using civil disobedience because they are saying, like, we won't get your attention otherwise. And that is very effective.
You just recently tweeted that Amazon workers, 900 of them, based in Seattle, it's the first time ever, they're going to also strike on September 20th. Yeah. What does that mean to you?
To me and to the movement, it means incredibly much because we have lots of unions who are planning to strike. So, I mean, adults striking from their work, and that is so incredibly important to show that this is such, and this is not just for children or teenagers, this is for everyone. And what we are doing, we are not, of course, I mean, we are striking to disrupt the system, to create attention.
So let's talk about what you're doing in these coming days. You're heading down to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. On Friday, what are your plans? That's Friday, September 13th.
Yes, on Friday, I'm going to, this Friday, the 13th, I'm going to join the school strike for the climate outside the White House in Washington, D.C. And
do you protest every single week on Fridays?
Yes.
Wherever you are in the world?
Yes, even on the boat. Every week, no matter where I am, on Fridays I will protest and demonstrate for the climate. Outside the parliament or local government building or town hall or anything.
So on the 13th, you're doing it in front of the White House.
Yes.
When you landed last week, you landed on Wednesday evening. Friday, you were in front of the United Nations.
Yeah.
With those who you inspired who had been protesting in front of the United Nations for many weeks, almost a year. So then talk about the following week, September 20th, what your plans are and what people's plans are around the globe.
Yes, on the 20th, we are planning a new global strike, and we call for people of all ages to join us, not just children. Adults are, of course, welcome as well to strike from their work. And so I will be in New York the 20th of September to join the strike here, and then on the 27th there is also a global strike.
And finally, your message to young people, people perhaps who don't vote, that's true, but are finding their place in the world. What do you say to them? And you can look directly into the camera.
My message to the young people of the world is that right now we are facing an existential crisis. I mean, the climate and ecological crisis, and it will have a massive impact on our lives in the future, but also now, especially in vulnerable communities. And I think that we should wake up, and we should also try to wake the adults up, because they are the ones who Their generation is the ones who are mostly responsible for this crisis, and we need to hold them accountable. We need to hold the people in power accountable for what they have been doing to us and future generations and other living species on Earth. And we need to get angry and understand what is at stake, and then we need to transform that anger into action and to stand together united and just never give up.
Yes, thank you for standing up for the climate, for speaking the truth, and really, it means a lot.
God bless you. Continue to walk, okay? Continue, okay? Go on, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Greta Thunberg. I'm a climate activist, and I just met with Pope Francis, and he was very kind, and he told us that we should continue like we do now, and he supports the school strike, the big school strike that is happening on May 24th, which also happened to be on the anniversary of Laudato Si. And so I urge you to join the climate strike, and we will take it to the streets, and we will continue to fight for our future until the politicians do something.
The green dots on this map shows all the registered strikes that will take place on 20 September 2019 across the world. South Africa has 34 registered strikes across the country. The climate emergency, disruption and rebellion are now a matter of life and death. South Africa is becoming a frontline for the climate crisis. On the 20th of September, the world will be striking in an attempt to force leaders to take more drastic steps in fighting climate change.